My daughter-in-law rolled her eyes when she saw my leather handbag at the restaurant. "Oh, Grandma Rose," she said loud enough for the whole table to hear, "that purse is so vintage." The word dripped with condescension. My son's new wife pulled out her designer clutch, sleek, modern, expensive, and made a show of placing it on the table like a trophy. The younger women at our family dinner exchanged knowing glances, barely suppressing their giggles. What they didn't know was that inside my old lady purse sat a checkbook connected to accounts they couldn't even imagine. What they didn't know was that their designer bags, their cars, their mortgage payments, even their grocery money, all of it flowed through my signature. But they were about to find out. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Rose Catherine Brennan, and at 74 years old, I've learned that people see what they want to see. When they look at me, they see sensible shoes, reading glasses on a chain, and yes, a well-worn leather handbag that's been my companion for nearly 2 decades. They see someone who clips coupons, drives 5 miles under the speed limit, and asks for senior discounts at the movie theater. They're not wrong about any of those things, but they're missing the bigger picture entirely. Owadens, I wasn't always the woman with the practical purse. 45 years ago, I was Rose Catherine Sullivan, fresh out of Northwestern University with a degree in business administration and fire in my belly. I was one of only 3 women in my MBA program, and I fought for every opportunity, every promotion, every seat at every table where decisions were made. While other women my age were choosing between families and careers, I was quietly building something different, a financial empire that would span decades. I started small, working as a junior analyst at a regional investment firm in Chicago. The men in their tailored suits would pat me on the head and give me the grunt work, filing reports and organizing meetings. But I was listening, learning, absorbing every conversation about market trends and investment strategies. I saved every penny of my modest salary, living in a studio apartment and eating canned soup for dinner while I studied the patterns of successful investors. By 30, I had enough saved to make my first real estate investment, a small duplex in an up-and-coming neighborhood. I lived in one unit and rented out the other, using that income to buy another property, then another. While my college friends were spending their money on fashionable clothes and expensive dinners, I was building a portfolio that would change everything. I met my husband, Patrick Brennan, when I was 32. He was a kind man, a high school history teacher with a gentle soul and absolutely no head for business. Patrick loved my ambition, even when he didn't understand it. He'd watch me pore over financial statements at the kitchen table, surrounded by calculators and legal documents, and he'd bring me coffee without asking questions. He never once suggested I slow down or scale back. Instead, he took care of everything else, the cooking, the cleaning, the social obligations, so I could focus on what I did best. We never had children of our own. It wasn't a tragedy or a source of endless grief. It was simply how our lives unfolded. Patrick and I were complete as we were, 2 people who complemented each other perfectly. While he shaped young minds in the classroom, I was quietly reshaping the financial landscape around us, one strategic investment at a time. The duplex became a small apartment building. The apartment building became a strip mall. The strip mall became a portfolio of commercial properties across 3 states. By the time I was 45, I owned more real estate than some small municipalities. By 50, I was investing in startup companies, backing entrepreneurs who reminded me of my younger self, hungry, determined, and vastly underestimated. Patrick never questioned my methods or my instincts. When I told him we were buying a failing restaurant chain, he trusted me. When I said we were investing in a small tech company that most people had never heard of, he signed the papers without hesitation. He understood that while he could inspire 15-year-olds to love American history, I could see 5 years into the future of any business I studied. The restaurant chain turned around within 18 months. The tech company was acquired by a major corporation 3 years later, netting us returns that exceeded our wildest expectations. Word began to spread quietly through certain circles. There was a woman in Chicago who had an almost supernatural ability to spot winning investments. I never advertised, never sought publicity. I didn't need to. Success has a way of finding you when you're genuinely good at what you do. My approach was methodical, almost clinical. I would spend weeks researching a potential investment, reading every financial report, visiting every location, interviewing every key employee. I looked at businesses the way a surgeon looks at a patient, with complete focus and absolute precision. I wasn't gambling, I was calculating. Every decision was backed by data, every risk was measured and weighed. The leather handbag came into my life 20 years ago, a gift from Patrick for our anniversary. It wasn't expensive or designer, just a simple, well-made bag from a local leather shop. But it was practical, with enough compartments to hold everything I needed for my business meetings. Contracts, checkbooks, calculators, and the small notebook where I kept track of every transaction, every appointment, every brilliant idea that struck me at unexpected moments. Patrick passed away 8 years ago, suddenly and quietly, the way he had lived most of his life. I was devastated, but I was also practical. Grief is a luxury when you're managing millions of dollars and dozens of properties. I threw myself into work with even greater intensity, expanding my investments into new markets, new industries, new opportunities. That's when my family started paying attention to me in a different way. My brother's children, whom I had helped put through college, began calling more frequently. My sister's daughter, who had struggled with her mortgage payments, started inviting me to family dinners. Suddenly, I wasn't just Aunt Rose with the sensible shoes and the practical purse. I was Aunt Rose with the mysterious financial resources and the generous heart. I didn't mind helping. Family is family, and I had more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. I quietly paid off student loans, covered medical bills, and provided down payments for houses. I never made a big show of it, never demanded gratitude or recognition. I simply wrote checks and moved on, the way I had been doing business for decades. But somewhere along the way, the gratitude turned into expectation. The appreciation became assumption. The family members who had once called to check on my well-being started calling to discuss their financial needs. I became less of a person and more of a resource, a reliable source of funding for their various dreams and emergencies. I continued to carry my practical leather handbag to every family gathering, every business meeting, every quiet dinner alone. It held my life, not just my money but my identity. Inside those worn compartments were the tools that had built my empire. The checkbook that could change lives with a single signature, the business cards of contacts who could make or break careers, the notebook filled with investment strategies that had never failed me. But when my nephew Michael brought his new wife, Christina, to our family Christmas dinner last year, I saw something in her eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. It wasn't respect or appreciation or even polite interest. It was dismissal. She looked at me, really looked at me, and saw exactly what she expected to see: an elderly woman with outdated fashion sense and old-fashioned ideas about money. She wasn't wrong about my appearance, but she was catastrophically wrong about everything else. And as I watched her whisper to the other young women in the family, pointing at my handbag and rolling her eyes, I realized that it was time for a lesson in assumptions. It was time for them to learn that the woman with the old lady purse wasn't just their reliable financial backup plan. She was their entire financial foundation, and foundations can be moved. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The first time I noticed the shift was at my great-niece Emma's college graduation party. I had arrived early to help set up, my leather handbag slung over my shoulder as I carried a casserole dish into the backyard. Emma's mother, my niece Jennifer, was arranging flowers when she spotted me. "Oh, Aunt Rose," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone I was becoming familiar with. "You know you don't need to bring anything. We've got everything handled." She gestured toward the catering tables being set up by professionals. "This isn't like the old days when we all had to pitch in." I smiled and set my dish on the table anyway. "Old habits," I said simply, though something in her words stung. The old days. as if my contribution was somehow quaint, unnecessary, a relic from a time when family actually helped each other, instead of just writing checks. Emma bounced over, radiant in her cap and gown, and threw her arms around me. Grandma Rose, thank you so much for the graduation gift. I can't believe you got me a whole car. Her friends, clustered nearby with their phones out, looked over with interest. One of them, a girl with perfect makeup and an expensive-looking handbag, raised her eyebrows. Your grandma bought you a car? That's so sweet. The way she said sweet made it sound like I'd given Emma a handmade bookmark instead of a brand new Honda Civic. But Emma didn't seem to notice. She was already showing off her keys, posing for photos with her friends. Yeah, Grandma Rose always comes through, Emma said, but she was looking at her phone screen now, not at me. She's like, super generous with money stuff. Money stuff. 45 years of strategic investing, of building a financial empire from nothing, reduced to money stuff. I watched Emma's friends nod politely before turning back to their own conversations, dismissing me as easily as if I were a piece of furniture. Later that evening, as the party wound down, I found myself sitting alone at a corner table, while the younger generation clustered around their phones, sharing photos and videos from the day. My great-nephew Jake, Emma's cousin, was showing off his new apartment to anyone who would listen. The rent's crazy expensive, he was saying, but Uncle Mike helped me out with the security deposit. He grinned at his father, my nephew Michael. Well, technically, Grandma Rose helped out, but you know what I mean. I knew exactly what he meant. Michael had called me 3 weeks ago, explaining that Jake needed help with his first apartment. The security deposit was $2,000, plus first month's rent. I had written the check without hesitation, the way I always did. But somehow, in Jake's retelling, Michael had become the hero of the story, and I had become a footnote. That's so cool that your family has money, one of Jake's friends said. My parents are always stressed about bills. Yeah, we're pretty lucky, Jake replied. My dad's side of the family is really good with investments and stuff. They've got that old school money wisdom, you know? Old school money wisdom. I almost laughed. There was nothing old school about the tech stocks I'd been buying, or the cryptocurrency investments I'd been carefully monitoring, or the renewable energy companies I'd been backing since before anyone else saw their potential. But to them, I was just a relic who happened to have deep pockets. Gomena. The pattern became clearer over the following months. At family dinners, I would sit quietly while the younger generation discussed their careers, their relationships, their plans for the future. They spoke around me, not to me, as if I were a benevolent but slightly confused grandmother who couldn't possibly understand their modern struggles. When my great-niece Sarah got engaged, the wedding planning became a family affair. The women gathered around Jennifer's kitchen table, surrounded by bridal magazines and fabric samples, excitedly discussing venues and menus and flower arrangements. We're thinking about the Riverside Country Club, Sarah said, flipping through a glossy brochure. It's gorgeous, but the price is pretty steep. How steep? Jennifer asked, though I could see she was already mentally calculating the budget. $15,000 just for the venue rental, Sarah admitted. And that's before food, flowers, photography, everything else. The table fell silent. I could feel the weight of their expectations settling around me like a familiar blanket. They didn't need to ask. They never asked anymore. They simply assumed. Well, Jennifer said carefully, I'm sure we can figure something out. As a family. I reached into my handbag and pulled out my checkbook, the same worn leather checkbook I'd been using for years. The cover was scuffed and the corners were soft from handling, but the numbers inside were as sharp as ever. The venue sounds lovely, I said, writing quickly. Consider it my engagement gift. Sarah squealed with delight and threw her arms around me. Oh my God, Grandma Rose, you're the best. I can't believe you just... Wow. But even as she hugged me, I could see the other women at the table exchanging glances. Not grateful glances, but knowing ones. The kind of looks that said, of course she did. That's what she does. Later, as I was putting my checkbook back in my purse, I caught Sarah's friend Madison staring at my handbag with barely concealed amusement. That's such a cute purse, Madison said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. It's so practical, very grandma chic. Sarah giggled. Madison, stop. That's mean. I'm not being mean, Madison protested, but her smile was sharp. I just think it's adorable how your grandma has that whole vintage look going on. It's like she's cosplaying as someone from the 1980s. The table erupted in laughter, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger, exactly, but a kind of clarity. These young women, who had just watched me write a check for $15,000 without blinking, were mocking the bag that contained the financial power to change their lives. She's got a point, though, Jennifer said, trying to sound diplomatic. Rose, you know, if you ever want to update your look, I'd be happy to take you shopping. There are some really nice handbags at the mall that would be perfect for you. Thank you, I said quietly, but I like this one. Oh, we know you do, Sarah said, patting my hand like I was a child. It's just that sometimes it's fun to try new things, you know. Live a little. Live a little. As if I hadn't been living boldly for 74 years. As if I hadn't taken risks that would make their heads spin. As if I hadn't built something extraordinary while they were still figuring out how to balance their checkbooks. The dismissal wasn't limited to my appearance. At family gatherings, when conversations turned to business or investing, I would offer insights based on decades of experience, only to be met with polite but blank stares. That's interesting, Aunt Rose, Michael would say, but things are different now. The market's more complicated than it used to be. More complicated. As if complexity was something new, something that had been invented after I stopped paying attention. As if the principles of smart investing had fundamentally changed since I'd started building my portfolio. When I mentioned that I'd been following the renewable energy sector, Jake laughed. Grandma Rose, you're so ahead of the curve. Most people your age don't even know what solar panels are. Most people my age. The condescension was wrapped in a compliment, but it was still condescension. The assumption that my age made me automatically less informed, less capable, less relevant. The final straw came during a family dinner at Christina's house. She had married into our family 6 months earlier, and she was eager to establish herself as the new social coordinator. The dinner was elaborate, with multiple courses and expensive wine, and Christina made sure everyone knew how much effort she had put into the evening. I just love entertaining, she said, as she served the main course. It's so important for families to come together, don't you think? I agreed, though I noticed that my own contributions to family gatherings were never mentioned. The graduation parties I'd hosted, the holiday meals I'd prepared, the countless times I'd opened my home to relatives who needed a place to stay. All of it seemed to have been forgotten in favor of Christina's new vision of family togetherness. As the evening wore on, the conversation turned to fashion. Christina had recently bought a new handbag, a designer piece that cost more than some people's monthly rent, and she was eager to show it off. It's a limited edition, she explained, holding up the bag for everyone to admire. Only 500 were made worldwide. I was on the waiting list for months. The younger women oohed and eehid appropriately, passing the bag around and examining its craftsmanship. When it reached me, I held it carefully, running my fingers over the soft leather. It's beautiful, I said honestly. Very well made. Thanks, Christina said, but her smile was tight. I'm sure it's not really your style, but I appreciate the compliment. Not really my style. As if my style was somehow inferior, somehow less valid than hers. As if the bag I'd been carrying for 20 years was a source of embarrassment, rather than a trusted companion. Speaking of style, Jennifer said, clearly trying to lighten the mood. We should really take Rose shopping one of these days. Help her find something more contemporary. Oh, that would be so fun, Sarah chimed in. Like a makeover day. We could do your hair, update your wardrobe, everything. They were talking about me as if I wasn't sitting right there, as if I were a project to be improved rather than a person to be respected. And as I looked around the table at these women whose educations I had funded, whose weddings I had paid for, whose dreams I had made possible, I realized that they saw me exactly the way they wanted to see me. They saw an old woman with an old purse, who was useful for writing checks but irrelevant for everything else. They saw someone who needed to be managed, guided, and gently corrected. They saw a relic from a simpler time who couldn't possibly understand their modern, complicated world. What they didn't see was the woman who had built the foundation their entire lifestyle rested on. What they didn't see was the strategic mind that had turned modest savings into generational wealth. What they didn't see was the careful planning that had made their casual assumptions about my generosity possible. But they were about to see all of that, and more. Because the woman with the old lady purse was about to remind them that assumptions can be dangerous, especially when they're built on such shaky ground. The restaurant was upscale, the kind of place where the servers knew about wine pairings and the bread came with 3 different types of butter. Christina had chosen it for what she called our quarterly family dinner, a new tradition she'd instituted to, quote, bring everyone together on a regular basis. I suspected it was more about showing off her organizational skills and her husband's credit card, but I'd agreed to attend because family is family, even when family becomes complicated. We were seated at a large round table near the windows, 8 of us in total. Myself, Michael and Christina, Jennifer and her husband Tom, Sarah and her fiancé David, and Jake. The conversation flowed easily around topics I'd heard 100 times before: work frustrations, weekend plans, the latest Netflix series everyone was watching. I sat quietly, listening, occasionally nodding when someone addressed me directly. My handbag rested on my lap, its familiar weight a comfort in the midst of all the chatter. I dressed carefully for the evening, wearing a navy blue dress that Patrick had always loved, and a simple strand of pearls. Nothing flashy, nothing that would draw attention, but I felt presentable. The trouble started when the appetizers arrived. Christina had pre-ordered for the table, explaining that she wanted everyone to try the restaurant's signature dishes. It was a thoughtful gesture, though I noticed she hadn't asked anyone about dietary restrictions or preferences. She simply assumed she knew what was best for everyone. The calamari here is supposed to be amazing, she said, passing the plate around. I read about it in Food and Wine magazine. As we shared the appetizers, Christina began talking about her recent shopping trip to Chicago. She'd spent the weekend at the high-end boutiques on Michigan Avenue, and she was clearly excited to share her discoveries. I found the most incredible handbag at Nordstrom, she said, pulling out her phone to show us photos. It's Italian leather, handcrafted by artisans in Florence. The waiting list is usually 6 months, but they had one in my preferred color. The phone made its way around the table, and everyone made the appropriate admiring sounds. When it reached me, I looked politely at the image on the screen. It was indeed beautiful, sleek, modern, with clean lines and minimal hardware. The kind of bag that made a statement about its owner's sophistication and financial resources. It's lovely, I said, handing the phone back. How much did something like that cost, if you don't mind me asking? Christina's cheeks flushed slightly. Oh, well, you know how designer bags are. It's more of an investment piece, really. Something that will last for years. Of course, I replied. I was just curious about the investment. I've always been interested in understanding the value of different purchases. There was a moment of silence, and I could feel the subtle shift in the room's energy. Sarah cleared her throat and quickly changed the subject to her wedding plans, but I caught the look that passed between Christina and Jennifer. It was a look that said she wouldn't understand anyway. The main courses arrived, and the conversation moved on to other topics. Jake was telling everyone about his promotion at work, and how he was finally making enough money to consider buying a condo instead of renting. The market's crazy right now, he said, cutting into his steak. My realtor says I need to be prepared to make an offer immediately when I find something I like. No time for inspection contingencies or financing delays. That's smart, Tom said. In this market, you've got to be aggressive. I took a sip of my wine and quietly said, actually, that's exactly when you want to be most careful about inspections and financing. When the market's hot, that's when people make expensive mistakes. Jake laughed, not unkindly, but with the patronizing tone I'd grown to recognize. Grandma Rose, I appreciate the advice, but real estate is different now than it was back in your day. Everything happens faster, and if you're not willing to take risks, you'll never get anything. Back in my day. As if I'd stopped paying attention to real estate markets decades ago. As if I hadn't been buying and selling properties while he was still learning to tie his shoes. You might be surprised, I said mildly. Some principles of smart investing don't change, regardless of market conditions. Oh, I'm sure you know a lot about the basics, Christina jumped in, her voice bright with condescension. But today's market is so complex. With all the technology and global factors, it's probably overwhelming for someone who's not in the business. Someone who's not in the business. I almost smiled at that. If only she knew. The conversation continued, but I found myself observing more than participating. I watched as these young adults, most of whom had never made a major financial decision without my assistance, confidently discussed investment strategies and market trends. I listened as they dismissed my input with polite but firm certainty that their understanding was superior to mine. When the check arrived, there was the familiar moment of awkward silence. 8 people, expensive restaurant, someone had to pay. I reached for my purse, but Christina waved me off. Hand. Oh no, Rose, don't worry about it, this is our treat. Our treat. As if she and Michael were the financial powerhouses of the family. As if their combined salaries could comfortably cover a meal that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. I settled back in my chair and watched as Christina confidently handed over her credit card. The server took it with a professional smile, but I caught the slight hesitation when she returned a few minutes later. I'm sorry, she said quietly, but this card was declined. Do you have another one? The blood drained from Christina's face. That's impossible. There must be some mistake. She fumbled through her designer handbag, pulling out another card. Try this one. The server disappeared again, and the table fell into uncomfortable silence. Christina was frantically checking her phone, probably looking at her banking app, while Michael stared at his hands. Maybe it's just a technical issue, Sarah said helpfully. Sometimes the card readers mess up, but when the server returned with the same apologetic expression, it was clear that this wasn't a technical issue. Christina's second card had also been declined. I don't understand, Christina whispered, her voice shaking slightly. This has never happened before. Michael leaned over to whisper something in her ear, but I could see the panic in both their faces. They had planned this dinner, invited everyone, made a show of their generosity, and now they couldn't pay for it. The silence stretched on, becoming more uncomfortable by the second. I could feel everyone's eyes darting between Christina and Michael, waiting for someone to solve the problem. Finally, I reached into my handbag and pulled out my worn leather wallet. I extracted a credit card, not my primary one, just one of several I kept for different purposes, and handed it to the server. Let me take care of this, I said simply. The relief around the table was palpable, but it was quickly followed by something else. Something that made my chest tighten with a familiar ache. Oh, Rose, Jennifer said, her voice dripping with pity. You don't have to do that. I'm sure Christina and Michael can figure something out. It's fine, I replied. My pleasure. But as I watched Christina stuff her declined cards back into her expensive handbag, I saw something in her expression that cut deeper than any previous slight. It wasn't gratitude or embarrassment. It was resentment. She was angry that her moment of sophisticated generosity had been ruined, and she was angry that I had been the one to save it. Thank you, she said stiffly. We'll pay you back, of course. Don't worry about it, I said, though we both knew she wouldn't pay me back. They never did anymore. The gifts and assistance had become so routine that the concept of repayment had become quaint, unnecessary. As we gathered our things to leave, I heard Christina whisper to Sarah, I'm so embarrassed. I don't know what happened with the cards. And now she's going to think we can't manage our own finances. She, not Aunt Rose or Grandma Rose, just she. As if I were a stranger who had witnessed their humiliation rather than family who had quietly rescued them from it. But it was what happened next that truly crystallized everything for me. As we walked toward the exit, Christina was still flustered, checking her phone and muttering about calling her bank. Her designer handbag was clutched tightly in her hand, and she was clearly agitated. I can't believe this happened, she said to no one in particular. This is so humiliating. Sarah, trying to be supportive, linked her arm through Christina's. Don't worry about it. Everyone has card problems sometimes. And besides, it's not like you needed that old-fashioned purse to save the day. She gestured toward my handbag with a little laugh, clearly trying to lighten the mood. I mean, can you imagine if we all had to dig around in those giant grandma purses for our cards? We'd be here all night. The laughter that followed was nervous, but it was still laughter. And as I walked behind them, listening to them joke about my old-fashioned purse and my grandma wallet, something clicked into place. These women whose lives I had funded, whose dreams I had made possible, whose emergencies I had quietly resolved, were mocking the very thing that had just saved them. They were making jokes about the handbag that contained the financial power to change their lives, while simultaneously depending on that power to rescue them from their own poor planning. The irony was so sharp it almost made me smile. Almost. 599 knives. Instead, I listened to them laugh and whisper as we walked to our cars, my practical shoes clicking steadily on the pavement. I listened to them dismiss me as an old woman with an old purse who was useful for emergencies but irrelevant for everything else. And as I got into my car, the car I had paid for in full with cash, I realized that it was time for a lesson in assumptions. It was time for them to learn exactly what happened when you bite the hand that feeds you. It was time for them to understand that the woman with the old lady purse wasn't just their financial safety net. She was their entire financial foundation. And foundations, as any good investor knows, can be moved. The drive home from the restaurant was silent except for the soft hum of my car's engine and the occasional click of the turn signal. I kept my hands steady on the steering wheel, my eyes focused on the road ahead, but my mind was racing through calculations that had nothing to do with traffic patterns or speed limits. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a long moment, not quite ready to go inside. The house would be quiet as it always was these days, and in that quiet I would have to face what I'd been avoiding for months, the uncomfortable truth about what my family had become. Inside, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop. This was my evening ritual, reviewing my investments, checking market reports, monitoring the various streams of income that flowed through my accounts like underground rivers. Most people my age were watching television or reading novels before bed. I was analyzing portfolio performance and planning strategic moves for the next quarter. But tonight was different. Tonight, I wasn't just reviewing my investments. I was reviewing my family. In novels. I opened a new document on my laptop and began typing. At the top of the page, I wrote, Family Financial Assistance Comprehensive Review. Below that, I created columns: name, amount, purpose, date, repayment status. The list grew longer than I expected. Michael and Christina, $15,000 for their wedding down payment. $8,000 for Christina's medical bills when she broke her leg skiing. $12,000 for the down payment on their current house. $3,500 for their European honeymoon when they came up short on vacation funds. $2,000 for car repairs after Christina's fender bender. Monthly subsidy of $1,200 for their mortgage payments, ongoing for 14 months. Jennifer and Tom, $25,000 for their daughter's college tuition, $6,000 for their kitchen renovation, $4,000 for Tom's dental work, $3,000 for their family vacation to Hawaii, $2,500 for their son's orthodontics. Emergency loan of $5,000 when Tom was laid off, never repaid. Sarah, $18,000 for her graduate school loans. $15,000 for her wedding venue, as of last week. $2,000 for her engagement ring when David's financing fell through. $1,500 for her bridesmaid duties for various friends' weddings. $800 for her car insurance after multiple speeding tickets. Jake, $2,000 for his apartment security deposit. $1,500 for his computer when he started his job. $3,000 for his car repair after the transmission failed. $1,000 for various emergency expenses over the past year. The total was staggering. In the past 5 years alone, I had given my family over $150,000 in direct financial assistance. That didn't include the gifts, the dinners I'd paid for, the vacations I'd funded, or the ongoing monthly support I provided to several family members. But it wasn't just the money. It was the pattern I saw emerging as I reviewed the dates and circumstances of each transaction. In the early years, after Patrick died, the requests had come with explanations, apologies, promises of repayment. The family members had seemed genuinely grateful, even embarrassed to be asking for help. Gradually, that had changed. The requests became more frequent, more casual, more entitled. The explanations became shorter. The apologies disappeared entirely. The promises of repayment were forgotten as soon as the checks were deposited. I closed the laptop and walked to my bedroom, where I kept my important documents in a fireproof safe. I pulled out a folder labeled Estate Planning and spread its contents across my bed. My will, my trust documents, my power of attorney papers, all of it meticulously organized and updated regularly. According to my current will, my estate would be divided equally among my living relatives. Michael, Jennifer, Sarah, Jake, and a few others would each inherit substantial amounts. The family members who had been mocking my old lady purse would become millionaires overnight when I died. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were laughing at the symbol of my financial acumen, while simultaneously depending on that acumen to fund their current lifestyle and secure their future wealth. I sat on the edge of my bed, surrounded by legal documents, and made a decision that surprised me with its clarity and calm certainty. I was going to teach them a lesson. Not a cruel lesson, not a vindictive one, but an educational one. A lesson about assumptions, about gratitude, about the difference between generosity and entitlement. A lesson about what happens when you take for granted the very thing that makes your comfort possible. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. I made my coffee, read the financial news, and then picked up my phone to make the first call. "Gordon?" I said when my attorney answered. "It's Rose Brennan. I need to schedule an appointment to revise my will." Gordon Blackwood had been my attorney for over 20 years. He was one of the few people who truly understood the scope of my financial situation, and he was also one of the few people who had never underestimated me because of my age or appearance. "Of course, Rose. Any particular urgency to this?" "Let's just say I've had some recent insights about my beneficiaries," I replied. "I think it's time to make some adjustments. I'll have my assistant call you with some available times. Anything else I can help you with today?" I smiled, thinking about the folder of financial documents in my handbag. "Actually, yes. I'd like to discuss setting up some new investment structures. I have some ideas about diversifying my portfolio in ways that might be educational for certain parties." Gordon chuckled. He'd known me long enough to recognize the tone in my voice. "I'm intrigued. Let's definitely discuss this when you come in." My next call was to my financial advisor, Patricia Wells. Patricia was sharp, ambitious, and had been helping me manage my investments for the past decade. She was also a woman who had built her own career in a male-dominated field, so she understood the value of being underestimated. "Patricia, I want to restructure some of my family trusts," I said without preamble. "I'm thinking about creating some conditional arrangements that might help my beneficiaries develop a better appreciation for financial responsibility." "Conditional how?" Patricia asked, and I could hear the interest in her voice. "Well, what if certain beneficiaries had to demonstrate financial literacy, or complete financial education courses, or show a pattern of responsible money management before they could access their inheritances?" "That's actually quite common in estate planning," Patricia said. "We could set up educational requirements, charity work requirements, even employment requirements if you wanted to encourage work ethic." "Perfect. Let's set up a meeting to discuss the details." My third call was to my accountant, Robert Chen. Robert had been handling my taxes and financial records for 15 years, and he was meticulous about documentation. "Robert, I want to create a comprehensive record of all the financial assistance I provided to family members over the past 10 years. Every gift, every loan, every payment made on their behalf. Can you compile that information for me?" "Of course. May I ask what you're planning to do with this information?" "Let's just say I'm considering some changes to my estate planning, and I want to make sure everyone understands the full scope of my previous generosity. I'll have that ready for you by the end of the week." With those calls made, I felt a sense of momentum building. but the real work was just beginning. I spent the rest of the morning researching financial literacy programs, estate planning strategies, and legal structures that would allow me to create what I was starting to think of as teaching moments for my family. I wasn't planning to cut them off entirely. That would be cruel, and despite their behavior, I still loved them. But I was going to make sure they understood exactly what they were taking for granted. By afternoon, I had outlined a comprehensive plan. It was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its effectiveness. First, I would quietly restructure my financial assistance to make it more transparent. No more anonymous payments, no more casual bailouts. If they wanted my help, they would have to ask for it directly, explain why they needed it, and acknowledge the source. Second, I would begin requiring financial literacy education for anyone who wanted to access their inheritance. They would have to complete courses on budgeting, investing, and financial planning. They would have to demonstrate that they understood the difference between assets and liabilities, between needs and wants. Third, I would create a system of graduated rewards for family members who showed genuine financial responsibility. Those who managed their money well would get increased access to trust funds. Those who continued to be irresponsible would find their access increasingly restricted. But most importantly, I would make sure they understood that their financial security was entirely dependent on decisions I made. Decisions that could be changed at any time. I looked at the legal documents spread across my kitchen table and felt a strange sense of satisfaction. For months, I had been feeling diminished, dismissed, reduced to nothing more than a convenient source of funding. But I was about to remind my family of something very important. The woman with the old lady purse wasn't just their grandmother, their aunt, their family member. She was their financial foundation, their safety net, their entire economic ecosystem. And ecosystems, as any good investor knows, can be very fragile when the foundation shifts. I picked up my leather handbag and checked its contents one more time. Checkbook, credit cards, business cards, the small notebook where I recorded all my financial observations. Everything I needed to change their world was right there, in the bag they found so amusing. Tomorrow I would begin implementing my plan. But tonight, I would enjoy the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I was no longer going to be taken for granted. The woman with the old lady purse was about to remind them who was really in charge. The first sign that something had changed came 3 weeks after my meetings with Gordon, Patricia, and Robert. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, reading the Wall Street Journal over my morning coffee when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Michael's name. "Hi, Aunt Rose," he said, his voice carrying a nervous energy I wasn't used to hearing. "I hope I'm not calling too early." "Not at all," I replied, folding the newspaper and setting it aside. "What can I do for you?" "Well, it's kind of embarrassing, but Christina and I are having a small cash flow issue. Our mortgage payment is due tomorrow, and we're about $800 short. I was wondering if you could help us out, just until my next paycheck comes in." This was the moment I had been preparing for. In the past, I would have immediately offered to transfer the money, probably rounding it up to $1,000 just to be safe. But now, with my new system in place, things were different. "Of course I can help," I said, pulling out the small notebook I now kept beside my chair. "But I'll need you to send me a written request explaining the situation and how you plan to pay it back." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "A written request? Aunt Rose, it's just $800. I'll pay you back as soon as I can." "I understand, but I'm trying to be more organized about my financial assistance," I said calmly. "I'm getting older, and I want to make sure I have good records of everything. You can email me the request, and I'll have the money transferred within an hour of receiving it." Okay. I guess I can do that. It just seems a little formal for family, you know? "Family is exactly why I want to be organized about it," I replied. "I want to make sure I'm being fair to everyone." After I hung up, I sat back in my chair and smiled. The first test had been successfully implemented. Within an hour, I received an email from Michael with a brief explanation of their cash flow problem and a promise to repay the money within 2 weeks. I transferred the $800 as promised, but I also sent a reply email confirming the loan, the repayment terms, and the date I expected to receive the money back. I copied Christina on the email, along with a note about how I was implementing new financial organization systems to, quote, ensure transparency and fairness for all family members. The second test came 2 days later, when Jennifer called about her son's orthodontist bill. The payment plan fell through, she explained, and they want the full amount up front. It's $3,500, and I just don't have that kind of money right now. I'd be happy to help, I said, already reaching for my notebook. But I'll need you to research some financial literacy resources first. There are some excellent budgeting courses available online, and I think it would be beneficial for you to complete one before we discuss the orthodontist payment. Financial literacy courses? Jennifer's voice rose slightly. Rose, this is about my son's teeth. It's not really the time for homework assignments. I understand it's urgent, I said patiently. But I'm realizing that my previous approach to financial assistance might not have been as helpful as I intended. I want to make sure I'm not just solving immediate problems, but helping everyone develop the skills to avoid these situations in the future. But I need the money by Friday. Then I suggest you start the course today. It's only 6 hours of online modules, and you can complete it at your own pace. Once you've finished, we can discuss the orthodontist payment and create a plan for managing similar expenses in the future. Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. This is really different from how you usually handle things. Yes, I agreed. I'm trying to be more intentional about my financial assistance. I think it will be better for everyone in the long run. The most interesting reaction came from Sarah, who called me the following week about her wedding expenses. Grandma Rose, I'm so stressed about the wedding costs, she said, her voice tight with anxiety. Even with the venue covered, we're still short about $8,000 for the photographer, the flowers, and the dress alterations. David's parents said they'd help, but they can only contribute $3,000, and I don't know where to get the rest. I had been expecting this call. Sarah's wedding was still 3 months away, which gave me plenty of time to implement my new educational requirements. I'm sure we can work something out, I said, but I'll need you to do a few things first. I want you to create a detailed budget for the wedding, research 3 different options for each vendor, and complete a financial planning workshop that focuses on major life events. A financial planning workshop? For my wedding? Sarah, you're about to get married. That's one of the biggest financial decisions you'll ever make. I want to make sure you and David have the skills to manage your money as a couple. The workshop covers budgeting, joint financial goals, and planning for major expenses. It's exactly what you need right now. But Grandma Rose, I don't have time for workshops. I'm already overwhelmed with wedding planning, and I work full-time. The workshop is entirely online and self-paced, I explained. You can complete it over a few evenings. And honestly, Sarah, if you don't have time to learn about financial planning before your wedding, when will you have time? I could hear her taking a deep breath. This is really different from how you usually do things. Yes, it is. I'm trying to be more helpful in the long term, not just the short term. The most revealing conversation came from Jake, who called me about his apartment situation. Grandma Rose, my lease is up next month and I found this amazing place, but they want first month's rent, last month's rent, and a security deposit. It's like $4,000 total and I just don't have that much saved up. Why don't you have that much saved up? I asked gently. There was a pause. What do you mean? I mean, you've been working full-time for over a year now. You don't have a car payment because I helped you buy your car outright. You don't have student loans because I helped with your college expenses. Where is your money going? I have expenses. Food, entertainment, clothes, going out with friends. You know, normal stuff. I understand. But if you want my help with the apartment, I'll need you to track your spending for the next month and create a budget that includes savings. I'll also need you to complete a course on personal financial management. A course? Grandma Rose, I'm 26 years old. I don't need to take a course on how to manage money. The fact that you're 26 and don't have $4,000 saved suggests otherwise, I said, not unkindly. Jake, I want to help you, but I also want to help you become self-sufficient. The course will teach you how to budget, save, and plan for major expenses so you don't have to rely on family financial assistance for routine things like apartment deposits. But I need the money now, not after I take some online course. Then I suggest you start the course today. Or, alternatively, you could ask your current landlord about a month-to-month extension while you save up the money yourself. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. I don't understand why you're making this so complicated, Jake finally said. You've never had requirements before. That's exactly the problem, I replied. I've been making it too easy, and that hasn't been helpful for anyone. Over the following weeks, I watched my family's reactions with fascination. Some of them reluctantly began the courses I'd required. Jennifer completed her financial literacy modules and actually called me to thank me for the recommendation. Michael sent me regular updates on his budget planning and asked for advice on improving his credit score, but others reacted with frustration and resentment. Christina complained to anyone who would listen about my new rules and how unreasonable I was being. Sarah postponed her wedding planning rather than complete the financial workshop, then called me crying about how stressed she was. Jake simply stopped calling altogether. The most telling moment came when I ran into Jennifer at the grocery store. She approached me with a smile that seemed genuinely warm, not the polite but distant smile I'd been receiving for months. "Rose, I wanted to thank you for pushing me to take that budgeting course," she said. "I learned so much about where our money was actually going. Tom and I have been able to save almost $500 a month, just by tracking our spending and cutting out things we didn't really need." "I'm so glad to hear that," I said, genuinely pleased. It made me realize that we've been living paycheck to paycheck, not because we don't make enough money, but because we weren't being intentional about how we spent it. The course showed us how to prioritize our expenses and plan for emergencies. This was exactly what I had hoped for. Jennifer was developing financial skills that would serve her for the rest of her life, rather than just receiving another temporary bailout. But as I drove home from the grocery store, I couldn't help but think about the family members who were struggling with my new approach. They were frustrated, confused, and some of them were probably talking about me behind my back. Jerker, I opened my handbag at a red light and looked at the worn leather checkbook inside. For decades, this checkbook had been my way of showing love, of solving problems, of being useful to my family. But I was beginning to understand that it had also been a way of avoiding difficult conversations about money, responsibility, and self-sufficiency. My new approach was harder for everyone, including me. It would have been easier to just write the checks, to solve the immediate problems without addressing the underlying issues. But easy wasn't always helpful, and helping wasn't always easy. I was learning that true generosity sometimes meant saying no, that real love sometimes required difficult lessons, and that the woman with the old lady purse had more to offer her family than just money. She had wisdom, experience, and the courage to use both, even when it made her temporarily unpopular. The journey of discovery wasn't just about what my family would learn about financial responsibility. It was about what I was learning about the difference between being needed and being respected, between being useful and being valued. And I was discovering that I preferred respect and value, even if they came with a little more complexity and a lot less gratitude. It was Christina who called the family meeting. She didn't call it that, of course. She framed it as a casual get-together to check in on everyone. But I knew better. I'd been expecting this for weeks, ever since my new financial assistance policies had started affecting their daily lives. The meeting was held at Michael and Christina's house on a Saturday afternoon. I arrived with my handbag as always and a small gift of homemade cookies. A peace offering, though I suspected peace wasn't what they were looking for. Everyone was there. Michael and Christina, Jennifer and Tom, Sarah and David, even Jake, who had been avoiding me for the past month. The living room felt tense, like a courtroom before a verdict is read. "Rose, thank you for coming," Christina said, her voice artificially bright. "We just wanted to have a family conversation about some changes we've all noticed." I settled into the armchair they'd designated for me, the one that faced the rest of the room like a defendant's chair, and waited. In my years of business negotiations, I'd learned that the person who speaks first often reveals more than they intend to. "The thing is," Jennifer began, glancing around the room for support, "we're all a little confused about your new policies regarding family financial assistance." "Policies?" I asked mildly. I prefer to think of them as improvements to my approach. "Right. But they're making things really difficult for everyone, Sarah said, her voice carrying a note of accusation. I still haven't been able to get the money for my wedding expenses because I haven't had time to complete that financial workshop you assigned me. Assigned is a strong word, I replied. I suggested it as a prerequisite for assistance because I think it would be valuable for you and David as you start your married life. But it's my wedding, Sarah continued, her voice rising. I shouldn't have to do homework to get help from my own family. Jake shifted uncomfortably in his chair. And I had to move back in with my parents because I couldn't get the apartment deposit without completing some online course. It's embarrassing. More embarrassing than being 26 and having no savings? I asked gently. The room fell silent. I could see the shock on their faces. They weren't used to me being so direct. Tom cleared his throat. Rose, we understand that you want to help us learn about money, but these requirements are creating real hardships. Jennifer's son still needs his orthodontic work, and we can't afford it without your help. And I can't afford to keep providing help without knowing that you're developing the skills to manage your finances independently, I replied. Jennifer, did you complete the budgeting course I recommended? Jennifer nodded reluctantly. Yes, I did. And what did you learn? I learned that we were spending almost $400 a month on things we didn't really need, she admitted. Restaurant meals, subscription services we forgot about, impulse purchases at the grocery store. And how much have you saved by eliminating those expenses? About $350 a month, Jennifer said quietly. I smiled. So in just 3 months, you'll have saved enough to pay for the orthodontic work yourself. That's not a hardship, Jennifer. That's progress. But Christina wasn't having it. Rose, this is ridiculous. You're treating us like children, making us jump through hoops for money that you've always given freely. What's changed? This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment when they would finally ask the right question. What's changed? I said, reaching into my handbag for the folder Robert had prepared, is that I've started keeping better records of my financial assistance to family members. I opened the folder and pulled out a detailed spreadsheet. In the past 5 years, I've provided over $150,000 in direct financial assistance to this family. That doesn't include gifts, dinners, vacations, or other expenses I've covered. I could see their faces changing as the number sank in. Additionally, I continued, I've been reviewing my estate plans and trust documents. I've realized that my current approach to financial assistance may not be preparing any of you for the responsibilities you'll face as beneficiaries of my estate. The room was completely silent now. Even David, who rarely spoke at family gatherings, was staring at me with wide eyes. What do you mean, responsibilities? Michael asked carefully. I mean that when I die, you'll inherit substantial amounts of money. If you don't have the financial literacy skills to manage that money wisely, you'll lose it. Studies show that 70% of wealthy families lose their wealth by the second generation, and 90% lose it by the third generation. I don't want that to happen to my family. Christina's face had gone pale. How much money are we talking about? I smiled. That depends on how well you all do with your financial education requirements. What do you mean? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I mean that I've restructured my estate plan to include graduated inheritance levels based on demonstrated financial competency. Those who complete financial literacy education, show responsible money management, and maintain gainful employment will inherit more than those who don't. Jake sat up straighter. You're saying our inheritances depend on taking your courses? I'm saying your inheritances depend on proving that you can handle the responsibility of significant wealth, I corrected. The courses are just one way to demonstrate that competency. Michael leaned forward. Mom, how much money are we talking about here? I pulled out another document from my folder. My current net worth is approximately $8.2 million. That includes real estate holdings, investment portfolios, business interests, and liquid assets. The silence that followed was deafening. I could actually hear the clock ticking on the mantelpiece. $8 million? Christina whispered. $8.2 million, I corrected, though the actual amount fluctuates based on market conditions and investment performance. Tom was the first to recover his voice. Rose, I had no idea you were worth that much money. Very few people do, I replied. I've always preferred to keep my financial situation private. Sarah was staring at me as if she'd never seen me before. But you clip coupons. You buy generic brands at the grocery store. You drive a 15-year-old car. I clip coupons because I enjoy getting good value for my money, I explained. I buy generic brands because they're often identical to name brands for half the price. I drive a 15-year-old car because it's reliable and paid for. These habits are part of how I accumulated $8.2 million in the first place. Jennifer was shaking her head slowly. All this time, we thought you were just comfortable, maybe a few $100,000 in savings. And all this time, you've been treating me like a convenient ATM, I replied, not unkindly. Making jokes about my old-fashioned purse while depending on what's inside it to fund your lifestyles. The room erupted in overlapping voices as everyone tried to speak at once. Christina was apologizing profusely, Sarah was crying, Michael was asking detailed questions about the estate plan, and Jake was frantically calculating his potential inheritance. I held up my hand for silence. I want to be clear about something. I'm not angry with any of you. I'm disappointed that you've taken my generosity for granted, and I'm concerned that you're not prepared for the financial responsibilities that come with wealth. But I'm not punishing you, I'm trying to prepare you. What do we need to do? David asked, speaking for the first time. Complete the financial education requirements I've outlined for each of you. Demonstrate responsible money management in your daily lives. Show that you can live within your means and plan for the future. Prove that you understand the difference between needs and wants. And if we don't? Jake asked. Then your inheritance will be placed in a trust with professional management. And you'll receive a monthly allowance based on your demonstrated financial competency. The principal will be donated to charity upon your death. Christina looked like she was going to faint. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious, I replied. Christina, 3 weeks ago at that restaurant, you couldn't afford to pay for dinner. Your credit cards were declined, and you were angry that I had to save you from embarrassment. Then you made jokes about my purse, the same purse that contained the financial resources to rescue you from that situation. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at their carefully manicured lawn. You've all been assuming that my money would always be there for you, that my generosity was unlimited and unconditional. But generosity without boundaries isn't helpful. It's enabling. When I turned back to face them, I could see the realization dawning on their faces. They were beginning to understand that the elderly woman with the outdated handbag wasn't just a reliable source of funding. She was the foundation of their entire financial security. The woman with the old lady purse, I said quietly, is the reason you can afford your mortgage payments, your children's educations, your medical bills, and your lifestyle choices. She's the reason you have a financial safety net, and she's the reason you'll never have to worry about money in the future. I picked up my handbag and headed toward the door. But she's also the reason you'll learn to manage money responsibly, whether you want to or not. As I reached the door, I turned back one more time. The courses are available online, and you can start them anytime. The sooner you complete them, the sooner we can discuss your specific financial needs and inheritance planning. I walked out of that house knowing that everything had changed. They would never look at me the same way again, and they would never look at my handbag the same way again. The woman with the old lady purse had finally shown them exactly what she was capable of. And they were just beginning to understand what they had been taking for granted all along. Bahama. Mananana fohama, mananana fohama. Jun manana sorsharud. The phone calls started the next morning. The first came at 7:30 a.m. Christina, her voice shaky with what sounded like a sleepless night behind it. Rose, I'm so sorry about yesterday. I had no idea about everything. I feel terrible about the things I said, about your purse, about the way I've treated you. I want to make it right. I sipped my coffee and looked out my kitchen window at the morning sun filtering through the oak trees. I appreciate the apology, Christina. What would you like to do to make it right? I want to take the courses, all of them. I want to learn about financial planning and budgeting and investing. I want to understand how you built what you've built. That's wonderful, I said, genuinely pleased. But I want you to do it because you want to learn. Not because you're afraid of losing your inheritance. There was a pause. Can I be honest with you? I'd prefer it. Right now, I'm terrified. I'm terrified that I've ruined everything with my behavior. But I'm also fascinated. You've been sitting in our family gatherings for years, and we had no idea you were this brilliant businesswoman. I want to understand how you did it. This was the response I'd been hoping for. Not fear-based compliance, but genuine curiosity and respect. Then let's start with the basics, I said. I'll send you some reading materials about fundamental investing principles. Take your time with them and call me when you have questions. The second call came an hour later. Sarah, crying so hard I could barely understand her words. Grandma Rose, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I've been such a brat, and I had no idea how generous you've been to all of us. I want to learn. I want to be better. Please don't cut me out of your will. Sarah, honey, slow down. I'm not cutting you out of anything. I'm trying to prepare you for something. But what if I can't learn it? What if I'm too stupid to understand investing and financial planning? You're not stupid, Sarah. You just haven't been taught. There's a difference. Will you help me? Will you teach me? I smiled. I'd be honored to teach you. The third call was from Jake, and his tone was completely different from the cocky young man who'd been dismissing my advice for months. Grandma Rose, I owe you a huge apology. I've been acting like a spoiled kid, and I didn't realize how much you've done for our family. I want to change. I want to be worthy of your confidence. Jake, what does being worthy of my confidence mean to you? It means learning how to take care of myself financially. It means not having to ask for help with basic things like apartment deposits. It means understanding money the way you do. Those are excellent goals. Are you ready to do the work to achieve them? Yes, ma'am. I'm ready. By the end of the week, I had received calls from every family member who'd been at the meeting. Some were motivated by fear, others by genuine interest, but all of them were finally treating me with the respect I'd been missing for years. The transformation was remarkable. Jennifer, who had already completed her budgeting course, called me twice a week to discuss her family's financial progress. She'd created a detailed budget, set up automatic savings transfers, and was researching investment options for their emergency fund. Rose, I can't believe how much control I feel now, she said during one of our conversations. For years, I felt like money was this mysterious thing that just disappeared from our account. Now I know exactly where every dollar goes. Michael surprised me by diving deep into real estate investment education. He discovered that I owned several rental properties and wanted to understand how property investment worked. I never realized you were a landlord, he said during one of our phone calls. I always thought you just had savings accounts and maybe some stocks. I own 19 rental properties across 3 states, I told him. Real estate has been one of my most consistent income sources for over 30 years. Would you consider partnering with me on a property? I could learn by doing, and you could teach me the business side. This was exactly the kind of engagement I'd been hoping for. I'd consider it, but you'd need to complete a comprehensive real estate investment course first. I can recommend some excellent programs. Already enrolled, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Even Christina, who had initially been the most resistant, threw herself into financial education with impressive determination. She enrolled in a comprehensive financial planning certification program and started a small investment account to practice what she was learning. I'm actually enjoying this, she admitted during one of our weekly check-ins. I never thought I'd be interested in the stock market, but understanding how companies grow and how to evaluate their potential is fascinating. What's your favorite investment so far? I asked. I bought shares in a renewable energy company after researching their technology and market position. It's only $50 worth, but I picked it myself based on fundamentals, not just because someone recommended it. I felt a surge of pride. That's exactly how I started. Small investments, careful research, learning from each decision. But the most significant change was in how they treated me personally. The condescending comments stopped completely. The dismissive glances disappeared. When I spoke about financial topics, they listened intently and asked thoughtful questions. At our next family gathering, a birthday party for Jennifer's husband, I noticed the difference immediately. Instead of sitting at the edge of conversations, I found myself at the center of them. Instead of being treated like an elderly relative who needed to be managed, I was treated like a mentor whose wisdom was valued. Rose, can you explain how you decided to invest in technology stocks in the 1990s? David asked during dinner. Sarah told me you bought shares in companies most people had never heard of. I spent hours researching emerging technologies and the companies developing them, I explained. I looked for businesses with innovative products, strong management teams, and the potential to disrupt existing markets. How did you know which ones would succeed? Sarah asked, genuinely curious. I didn't know for certain, but I diversified my investments so that if some failed, the successes would more than compensate for the failures. The key was thorough research and measured risk-taking. Jake leaned forward. Grandma Rose, I've been thinking about what you said about building wealth slowly. I've started putting 10% of my paycheck into a savings account, but I want to start investing too. Where should I begin? What have you learned from the Investment Basics course? I asked. That I should start with low-cost index funds and gradually learn about individual stock selection as I gain experience. Excellent. And why index funds? Because they provide instant diversification and have lower fees than actively managed funds. Over time, most index funds outperform actively managed funds because of the fee difference. I smiled. Perfect. You're ready to start investing. The evening continued with detailed discussions about market trends, investment strategies, and financial planning. My family members asked intelligent questions, shared their own research, and treated my opinions with genuine respect. As I was preparing to leave, Christina approached me with something I'd never seen from her before: humility. Rose, I want to thank you for being patient with me. I know I was awful to you, and I know I didn't deserve your kindness. But you've changed my life. I understand money now in a way I never did before. How has it changed your life? I asked. I feel powerful, she said simply. I feel like I have control over my future, instead of just hoping things will work out. I understand how to make money work for me instead of just working for money. That's exactly the feeling I wanted you to have, I said. Financial literacy is about more than just money. It's about confidence, independence, and the ability to make choices based on your own goals rather than your circumstances. As I drove home that night, I reflected on the transformation that had occurred over the past few months. My family had gone from treating me like a convenient source of funding to treating me like a respected mentor and advisor. They'd gone from mocking my old lady purse to understanding that it represented decades of wisdom and careful planning. But more importantly, they'd gone from being financially dependent to being financially educated. They were developing the skills and knowledge they'd need to manage their inheritances wisely and build their own wealth over time. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a moment, looking at my house. The house I'd paid off decades ago. The house that had appreciated significantly in value. The house that represented one small piece of the empire I'd built through patience and strategic thinking. I picked up my leather handbag from the passenger seat and held it for a moment. This bag had been with me through countless business meetings, investment decisions, and family gatherings. It had carried the tools I'd used to build generational wealth, and it had been the target of dismissive comments from people who didn't understand its significance. But now they understood. Now they knew that the woman with the old lady purse wasn't just their grandmother or aunt. She was a master of financial strategy, a successful investor, and a teacher who had the power to change their lives. The empowerment I felt wasn't about the money or the control. It was about the respect, the recognition, and the knowledge that I was finally being seen for who I truly was. The woman with the old lady purse had reclaimed her position as the head of the family, not through dominance or manipulation, but through education and empowerment. And it felt magnificent. 6 months after the family meeting that changed everything, I found myself in the most unexpected place. A conference room at the downtown Marriott, surrounded by my family members and a room full of strangers, about to give a presentation on building generational wealth after 50. The invitation had come from the local Women's Investment Club, a group of professional women who met monthly to discuss financial strategies and market trends. Jennifer, who had become quite active in financial education circles, had told them about my story. They wanted to hear from someone who had built significant wealth later in life and was successfully passing that knowledge to the next generation. I looked out at the audience of about 60 women, ranging in age from their 30s to their 70s, all of them eager to learn. My family sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Christina had her notebook out, ready to take notes on a presentation she'd helped me prepare. Sarah was recording the session on her phone, not for social media mockery this time, but because she wanted to share the financial wisdom with her fiancé. Jake had brought his girlfriend, eager to show her the grandmother who had become his financial mentor. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice steady and confident. 6 months ago, if someone had told me I'd be standing here giving a presentation about wealth building, I would have laughed. Not because I don't know about building wealth. I've been doing it successfully for over 40 years, but because no one in my family thought my financial knowledge was worth listening to. A few chuckles rippled through the audience, but I could see the recognition in many faces. They understood the feeling of being underestimated. "I'd like to tell you about my handbag," I continued, reaching down to pick up my leather purse from beside the podium. "This bag is 20 years old. It's scuffed, unfashionable, and completely practical. My family used to call it my old lady purse, and they'd make jokes about it at family gatherings." I opened the bag and pulled out my checkbook, the same worn leather checkbook that had funded countless family emergencies and dreams. What they didn't realize is that this old lady purse contained the financial tools that had built an $8.2 million empire. This checkbook has purchased real estate in 3 states, funded startup companies that became major successes, and provided financial security for multiple generations of my family. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. But more than that, this purse represents something that many women of my generation struggle with: the invisible wealth we've built through careful planning, strategic thinking, and decades of smart financial decisions. We're often dismissed as little old ladies with outdated ideas, when in reality, we're experienced investors who've survived multiple market crashes, economic recessions, and major life transitions. I saw several women in the audience nodding in recognition. The problem wasn't that I lacked financial knowledge or success. The problem was that I had allowed my family to see me as a source of financial assistance, rather than a source of financial wisdom. I was writing checks to solve their problems instead of teaching them to solve their own problems. Jennifer raised her hand slightly, and I nodded for her to speak. "Aunt Rose changed all of our lives when she stopped being our family ATM and started being our financial educator," she said. "I learned more about money management in 3 months than I had in my entire adult life. Now I'm helping other women in my community learn the same skills." "That's exactly the point," I continued. "Financial literacy isn't just about individual success. It's about breaking generational cycles of financial dependence and creating generational cycles of financial empowerment." I walked closer to the audience, my handbag still in my hand. "How many of you have been dismissed because of your age, your appearance, or your old-fashioned ways of doing things?" I asked. Nearly every hand in the room went up. "How many of you have family members who assume you need help with technology, with modern financial concepts, or with understanding today's economy?" Again, most hands were raised. "And how many of you have actually been quietly building wealth, making smart investments, and managing your finances more successfully than the people who are trying to help you?" The room erupted in knowing laughter as almost every hand shot up. "We need to stop allowing others to underestimate us," I said firmly. "We need to stop hiding our financial competence behind modest appearances and self-deprecating humor. We need to own our expertise and demand the respect we've earned." Christina stood up. "Can I say something?" I nodded. 6 months ago, I was one of those people making jokes about Rose's purse. I thought I was sophisticated because I had designer bags and knew about trendy restaurants. But Rose was carrying around more financial knowledge in her old lady purse than I had in my entire brain. She taught me that true wealth isn't about what you carry your money in. It's about how you make your money work for you. The audience applauded, and I felt a surge of pride in how much Christina had grown. "The lesson here isn't just about money," I continued. "It's about respect, recognition, and the power of education. When I stopped simply solving my family's financial problems and started teaching them to solve their own problems, everything changed. They stopped seeing me as a convenient resource and started seeing me as a valuable mentor." I held up my handbag again. "This purse represents 40 years of financial experience. thousands of hours of research and analysis, and the confidence that comes from building something significant from nothing. It's not fashionable, but it's functional. It's not trendy, but it's trustworthy. It's not impressive to look at, but it's incredibly impressive in what it represents. Sarah stood up next. Grandma Rose didn't just teach us about money. She taught us about respect. She showed us that assumptions can be dangerous, especially when you're making assumptions about the people who have the power to change your life. I smiled at her. That's exactly right. Your assumptions about my capabilities were limiting your own opportunities to learn from my experience. I turned back to the full audience. So here's my challenge to all of you. Stop hiding your financial competence. Stop allowing others to dismiss your expertise because of your age or appearance. Stop being the family ATM and start being the family financial educator. Use your knowledge to empower others, not just to enable them. An older woman in the back row raised her hand. But what if your family doesn't want to learn? What if they just want the money? Then you set boundaries, I replied. You require education before assistance. You make financial literacy a prerequisite for financial support. You show them that your generosity comes with the expectation of growth and responsibility. And if they refuse? She asked. Then you let them experience the natural consequences of their choices, I said. Love doesn't require enabling. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is allow someone to learn from their mistakes. Jake stood up. Grandma Rose saved me from myself. If she had kept giving me money without requiring me to learn about financial management, I would have been dependent on her forever. Now I'm building my own wealth, and I'm teaching my girlfriend what I learned. The presentation continued for another 30 minutes, with audience members sharing their own stories of being underestimated and asking for specific advice about implementing financial education requirements in their own families. As the evening wound down, I was surrounded by women who wanted to continue the conversation. They shared business cards, asked for book recommendations, and thanked me for giving them permission to own their financial expertise. You've inspired me to stop hiding my investment success from my children, one woman said. They think I'm just a retired teacher living on Social Security. They have no idea I've been building a portfolio for 30 years. It's time to show them, I encouraged her. Not to brag, but to educate. Not to intimidate, but to inspire. As my family and I walked back to our cars, I felt a profound sense of completion. The journey from being dismissed as the woman with the old lady purse to being respected as a financial mentor and educator had been challenging, but it had been worth every difficult conversation and every uncomfortable moment. Rose, Christina said as we reached our cars, I want you to know that you've changed my entire relationship with money. I used to be afraid of it, intimidated by it. Now I feel powerful and confident. That's exactly how I wanted you to feel, I replied. Financial literacy is about more than just money. It's about confidence, independence, and the ability to make choices based on your own goals. I looked at my family members, all of them transformed by the experience of the past 6 months. They had gone from being financially dependent to being financially educated. They had gone from dismissing my expertise to seeking my guidance. They had gone from making jokes about my appearance to celebrating my achievements. But most importantly, they had learned that true wealth isn't about what you carry your money in. It's about how you make your money work for you and how you use your knowledge to empower others. As I drove home that night, I thought about the woman I had been 6 months ago. Generous but taken for granted, successful but unrecognized, wise but dismissed. And I thought about the woman I had become, respected, valued, and finally seen for who I truly was. The woman with the old lady purse had taught her family the most valuable lesson of all. Never underestimate someone based on their appearance, their age, or their old-fashioned ways. Because sometimes, the most powerful person in the room is the one who looks the least threatening. And sometimes, the most valuable thing you can carry isn't a designer handbag filled with status symbols, but a practical purse filled with the tools to change lives. My leather handbag and I had accomplished something remarkable. We had transformed a family's understanding of wealth, respect, and the power of education. We had proven that true strength comes not from demanding recognition, but from earning it through wisdom, patience, and the courage to set boundaries. The woman with the old lady purse had the last laugh, and it was the sweetest sound of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, You won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.